fact that, Krug, in some ways it's kind of we're getting a little more clarity this offseason. And in some ways it felt like the 49ers kind of wrote Trey Lance off coming into this offseason. I think they thought he was done. I don't know if they really thought that he would make.
They challenged him.
They challenged him. And I don't know if they were even expecting him to respond to this challenge. And that's where I really credit the player, right? Because he's in a difficult situation. He's still young. I can identify because we are a similar age. He is dealing with a lot in life and having to go through the injuries, having to go through all the different things he's had to go through. The fact that he came back improved. He came back better at the stuff that everybody said he couldn't do. I think that says a lot about him and his character and his resolve and his belief. And I don't think that if it doesn't work out for Trey Lance, I don't think it's a situation of Trey Lance didn't want it or Trey Lance didn't work to make it happen. Sometimes you can want it. Sometimes you can work hard. Sometimes you can be talented, but situations just don't come together for creating the best opportunity for yourself. And I think this is kind of one of those situations where he was drafted to a team whose timeline never fit what timeline he needed to develop. And, I said this before the draft. I said, this is why they shouldn't draft him. And I thought it wouldn't bear out that way because I thought they were so confident in the process of developing him that they knew something I didn't know. And it turns out that they couldn't cheat the process, and they tried to.
Well, and there's no, let's call it for what it is. There's no mechanism within the game in the NFL currently to develop an underdeveloped quarterback.
Right.
There's no there's no AAA. Right. There's no G League. In the NBA, you draft a guy, he's too raw. Okay, you send him to G League. He plays on a G League game Tuesday night. He plays on a G League game Thursday night. He plays in a G League game Saturday night. And the following Tuesday, if you want to call him back up, you call him back up, and he's played 3 games.
Right.
If the Niners could have sent Trey to a G League type situation and had him get 3 games of reps, he would have totally had a different trajectory as far as his development. Instead, it's like there is nothing like that. There's no AAA. There's no minor league system. And so I think, and it's the same reason that teams are probably not in a rush to trade for him, because the same way the Niners don't have anywhere to develop him, nobody else has anywhere to develop him either. So if you're going to, and in September, how many teams in the NFL enter September going, we'll scrap the season? Hardly anybody. So, I mean, everybody thinks they got a shot.
That's where I fault the Niners, right? That's where I fault the Niners, because I feel like once you made that monumental of a move, you had to commit to it. And the Niners made the commitment by making that monumental move, but they never fully committed to it, right? Like, they were calling the day before the draft. They loved the rookie quarterback so much. They wanted this contract. It's going to help their roster. And they were calling the day before the draft about a quarterback 15 times more expensive than any of the quarterbacks on their roster, right? And Aaron Rodgers, the contract he was getting and stuff like that. And so that's where I kind of blame the Niners, and I don't really blame Trey Lance. And I'm not critical of Trey Lance because I think Trey Lance is in a situation where I don't know if he could have done anything different. Like, the only thing that maybe should have happened for Trey Lance is, by God's grace, he shouldn't have gotten hurt, but he got hurt. That was the only thing that, to me, he did that was a negative on Trey Lance personally. Otherwise, I felt like it was a Niners situation of not understanding how difficult it would be to replace Garoppolo within the confines of their team, and not understanding truly where Trey Lance is, where he was, what development he needed, and where their roster was, and what their roster needed to go over the top.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's like Anthony Richardson. Richardson's going to start this year. They're not going to.
And they're going to go through the process with him. They're going to go through the process with him. And it's one of those things where a lot of people look at the Niners and they say they're so successful because they went to back-to-back NFC championship games despite having a sunk cost basically here with this asset. I argue the latter. I argue that we knew that they were a team capable of doing that. The only thing that happened in 2020 was injuries. We felt like they made that move at quarterback because they saw the moves the Rams made and all of that, and they thought that's what would get them over the top. And then halfway through, they decided that they didn't need that to get over the top, and they kind of got stopped at the exact same spot that they told us they were going to get stopped with Jimmy Garoppolo, if that makes sense. So they're kind of in a funky situation, and that's where, like, again, I understand what they're doing. I think they've handled it the right way, actually, in a lot of ways throughout training camp, how they've handled giving Brock reps, Trey reps, Sam reps, all of that. But in terms of criticizing Trey Lance, I find it difficult to criticize him. He didn't draft himself. He didn't tell anybody that he was more developed than he was. This isn't a Shabazz Muhammad situation where he lied about his birth certificate and he's actually 20 when he says he's 18, right? Like, he is, to quote Denny Green, exactly who he thought he was. And the Niners decided halfway through that they didn't want who he thought he was, and that's not his fault.
If Belichick called tomorrow and offered Mac Jones for Trey Lance, would Shanahan do it?
I mean, look, I think they should have drafted Mac Jones looking back on the situation. And it's not a situation of I think Mac Jones is a good quarterback or I think Trey Lance is a bad quarterback. It's not that situation. Look at how they talk about Brock Purdy. In some ways, right, like Brock Purdy shows that they dodged a bullet not drafting Mac Jones. But that's what they were looking for at quarterback, dude. That's the problem, right? Like, they were looking for Mac Jones, and then they drafted Trey Lance. And that's the problem I have with the situation. It's not that I think Mac Jones was good or Mac Jones is great. I don't know yet. We'll see what happens with Mac Jones. It's not that I think Trey Lance is bad or Trey Lance is the worst. I don't know yet. But I think when you look at the plan the Niners had, what they were looking for from their rookie quarterback and all of this, what they were looking for is Mac Jones. They should have just drafted that because that's what they were looking for. It might not have been the right decision. Fields might have had a higher upside. Lance might have had a higher upside, but they were not looking for what they got in Lance. That's why they've kind of given up on that plan.
It's just the timing was wrong. The timing was wrong. If Lance had been in their first draft, they, Kyle was, they won 10 games in the first 2 years.
Quarterback in the first draft. Because if you draft a quarterback in the first draft, even if you draft Garrett Wilson, you draft Sauce Gardner, you draft all these good players, and that quarterback doesn't develop in 2 years, unless you go throw a Hail Mary and get Aaron Rodgers to come save your ass, you're on the hot seat 2 years in. And you could have done 20 good things. But if you don't get the quarterback right, you're out of here. They didn't take that risk. They went the safe route by taking Solomon Thomas, the high-character defensive lineman, right, from Stanford.
Yeah. No, but I mean, looking at it, I mean, if you're going to take a quarterback as raw as Trey, you should have done it in year one.
Right. And you built a team where they develop around him.
Instead, they got in, they gave away those first couple of years to developing their roster, and then they drafted him when they were already well within inside their Super Bowl window, and now it's like, okay, they haven't been able to give him reps, they haven't been able to develop him. He's developing anyway; he's just developing slowly. And my question is this: are they going to go the distance, or are they going to jump off? And I hope they go the distance, because to me, if you go the distance, that means you got an expensive third string quarterback or second string quarterback, but you're going to see it through to completion. And I think he's going to get there, but I'm not sure that they're going to. And I just kind of wonder about the presence of Brandon Allen and Sam Darnold. Are those guys indications that they're not going to go the distance with Trey, that they're going to look at this and go, the rest of the league spending $1 million for their third string quarterback. And if Sam Darnold beats out Trey, the Niners will be spending 9 times what the rest of the league is spending on their third string quarterback, and in the midst of a talented roster where you may need that cap room. But I hope they stick with Trey long term, because I really believe they'll be rewarded on the back end if they do. But it's going to be very challenging. It's going to be a very challenging thing. And I bet you there's a lot of debate internally on their options.
Perhaps. I will say the other thing to it that nobody's discussing too is he's just not what you would coin as your ideal backup quarterback, right? Like, he's not a guy that's suited to come in 6 games into the year and a half and be like, yo, you got to be the guy that's got to turn this around, right? Like, he's a guy that needs to play and needs to have a team committed to a certain plan with him.
He needs to be on a second division team. Like, the best thing for Trey would be if he were on a team like the Raiders, if a team that is not ready to win in the AFC.
It is a situation like that, Krug, and that's where I think people get so insulted when the conversation of moving Trey Lance comes up, because they find it to be an indictment of the talent of the player in some ways. And honestly, the way I look at the situation when they talk about that is the 2 things that you mentioned. One is, do we want to spend $10 million on a third string quarterback? I think that's a real conversation that they're going to have. And it doesn't mean, by the way, it has nothing to do with Brandon Allen being better than Trey Lance.
No,
It's
it's
purely
nothing
a
to do with that.
financial conversation.
Right.
And then two is we have this talented player in Trey Lance. Let's say that if you go through the process, you still believe that there's an upside there, right? I'm not going to say definitively the upside isn't or isn't there. Let's pretend that it's just there. But do you believe that he is suited to be the backup on your team because you've already committed to Purdy? That's a completely different conversation when you're talking about the dynamics of your quarterback room. What's best for Trey Lance? Is he suited to be in a role where you kind of need to have him come in, stopgap, and all of that? Because he needs to go to a place that he kind of can play and all of that. So there's further conversations when you're talking about moving Trey Lance at the end of this offseason if he's not the starter for the 49ers that have a lot less to do with his ability, how good he is, how good he can be, and just more to do with the dynamics of this roster and how he fits into that.
I mean, to me, I think what's going to happen, if you say, what do you predict is going to happen? I think he's going to play well in the preseason. I think other teams are going to see that that he plays well. And I think the market will heat up for him in late August. And I think instead of being offered a 5th-round pick, the Niners will be offered more like a 2nd or a 3rd-round pick.
Arizona, man, you got nothing to lose.
I really believe that.
Nothing to lose, Arizona.
But the question is, will they take the pick, or will they then be swayed by his turnaround and his improvement and say, you know what, if he's improved this much without playing, he could really improve over the next year.
But then
I'm really interested to see how they react to him playing well, because he's going to play well.
Would you start him in that situation then? Because that's the problem, right? Like, it's not that he can't play well, but in the situation that you're feeling optimistic about his growth, the option isn't to just have him keep playing scout team behind Purdy. The option is you put him in and you see how far that growth gets by the end of week 17, week 18. If you're not willing to commit to that option, to me, you have to move him.
Well, there's no
pigeonholing his development then another year.
You're talking about a quarterback that's played 1 year of competitive football since high school.
Right.
They're not going to hand him the keys to the car on a Super Bowl championship team. They're not.
They did it last year, and they're not planning to. And I think that's the crux of the issue, right? Like, you can feel good about his talent, but there's a process that I think you and I agree that you have to go through to get him to the end of his talent. And it feels like the 49ers aren't willing to commit to that process in any capacity. And I don't think that process happens with him just riding the bench year after year after year. And then at some point it just clicks and he turns into a great quarterback. Like, I think there's also a process that he needs to go through on the field. And I hope he gets the opportunity to do it at some capacity. Because like you said, I want to find out. I don't want to be sitting here 4 games into his career trying to do this. Does he have it? Does he not have it? We don't know whether he has it or he doesn't have it, other than the fact that he's played four damn games. And so I would love for him to get that extended run and extended opportunity, and for us to really find out what he is and all of that. And perhaps that comes with the Niners.